other one, you bastard!
Brought to you by supporters who probably have better taste than this schmuck.
You ever get too much of a good thing? Because lately, that's really what it feels like is happening with Transformers. Who knew cutting out the middleman and allowing the design team to go nuts could lead to such amazing results? Legacy has hit a high point, finally at the level 2010 peaks with. Every continuity gets their day in the sun, or will in the near future. We live in a timeline where Tarn is a first-wave Voyager, and not a retool of some C-tier Sunbow G1 character that took precedence because a certain someone can't think beyond this period of time. No, I will not stop criticizing Warden. I didn't like his direction then, and I still don't to this day. Studio Series has finally broken out of its slump and is starting to experiment with some really unique engineering styles. And that's ignoring the incoming High Moon designs, which, yes, yes, that's rad. Rise of the Beasts is ramping up its releases to the point where in many cases you have multiple versions of each character to choose from. The mainline versus Studio Series debate is incredibly heated, and as long as you ignore the slander against the adorable Pablo, you'll be sure to find plenty of positives on either side. Even distribution is getting better. I can waltz into a random Big W and find Metal Hawk just sitting there on a shelf. This kind of shit would never have happened 2 years ago. I had to resort to importing in bulk from Singapore just to make sure I didn't miss anything. Suffice to say, unless you're a Masterpiece fan, most people watching this channel likely have very little to complain about. We're being inundated with top-of-the-line releases, and sometimes that can be a problem. It's hard getting into each and every figure, savoring them and enjoying the hidden brilliance. And if you want to take a gander at the worst example of this, look no further than combiners. Sure, sometimes there are exceptions, but more often than not, the whole overtakes the sum of its parts. Hell, even I fell victim to that with my favorite combiner of all time. It's an incredibly common occurrence, scarily so. So, you know what? Let's shift gears for a bit. Let's not discuss the most brilliant of figures, the most disappointing, the most controversial, or the most historically relevant. Let's just take a look at a figure that I found myself quite fond of, in spite of its positioning. Greetings, Cybertronians, I'm DrLockdown, and today's diagnosis pertains to Legacy Evolution Deluxe Class Breakdown. Yes, just Breakdown, not the other Stunticons, not Menasor, just a little old deluxe that nobody seems to be shining a light on. And you know what? I take offense to that. I want more people to pay attention to Breakdown. So today, we doing Breakdown. Though, in defense of those indifferent, I can kinda see why he doesn't get talked about often. Or rather, doesn't get talked about often these days. If we're talking most iconic G1 Transformers vehicles outside of the usual suspects, it's probably a toss-up between the Eagle and the Countach. Maybe it's because of how often it showed up, given no less than 3 unique molds placed it front and center before the show was done, and at least twice in the years that G1ers pretend didn't happen. Probably had more uses, but I ain't spending all afternoon on TF Wiki. Feel free to drop them in the comments below and
Game the algorithm for me!
So, with as iconic as the Countach is, this obviously ain't it. Leggy Evie Breakdown turns into an approximation of an approximation, and people were not happy when this was leaked. When we first saw photos of the alt mode, Breakdown went viral, trending on Twitter, and I don't mean trending on Transformers Twitter specifically, oh no, he was trending on general Twitter, presenting the full breadth of the Transformers fandom's complaining to the world. Now, the reason for this poor guy's inaccuracy is equal parts predictable and annoying, or rather should I say, alleged reason. See, back with one of the Roundtable event coverages last year, I recall someone reporting our Lord and Savior Mark Clonus wanted to make Breakdown a Countach, but Hasbro Corporate refused. They insisted that Breakdown be released as a minimum change retool of Wild Rider. Apparently a Countach and a GTB are the same. Time and time again, he kept trying to push it, but they just wouldn't budge. It was getting to the point where they were even hesitant to let him change the torso and head. Thing is though, I went back to find evidence of this and, I can't? So either it's been deleted due to NDAs being breached, or I'm experiencing a discount edition of the Mandela effect. The closest thing I could find was the description on his Instagram post confirming it was a corporate decision. Not as comprehensive, I'm afraid, but oh well. Either way, it's obvious this isn't a designer mishap, but rather an unfortunate side effect of having to report to a board of directors. That said, I can also fully understand the disappointment fans had when first realizing what this was going to be. Legacy and War for Cybertron have set a precedent for semi-accurate vehicle modes over the past 6 6 years. Furthermore, we've already had 2 reasonably accurate versions of this vehicle released, as well as redecoed over and over. Hell, even the last version of Breakdown was fairly accurate, so why couldn't this one be? Sure, that meant Wild Rider decidedly wasn't in both releases, but the annoyance is there. So yes, I ultimately do understand the frustrations with this release. The community was inadvertently conditioned to expect a Countach, and instead...
And because of you degenerate f***s, guess what we got? A car. How boring is this? Look at how boring this is.
However, I've never been one to complain about inaccuracies. I know it can come across as that sometimes when something looks like shit and I compare it to the source material to show where it went wrong, but this here ain't one of those examples. Yes, Breakdown missed the quote-unquote mark pretty hard, but in a vacuum as his own thing, I gotta say, this is one rad alt mode. As touched upon earlier, Breakdown is a minimal retool of Wild Rider, changing practically no mechanical detail from his leg mates. The only real point of difference is the new boot section, capped off with a detachable spoiler, and yet somehow with this small difference and a fresh coat of paint, Breakdown takes on a whole life of his own. By coincidence of his retooling, he's been likened to an unlicensed Jalpa, but while research has shown that this car was pretty much a failure, Breakdown is anything but. The front of the car is crisp, rocking that red trapezoid Breakdown is well known for. Gotta say, after the sheer insanity of the last topic, it's nice to see red paint applied properly. The top section somewhat plays it safe, adding a few vents here and there and not much else. But the front goes hard. The greebling here is insane, and you'd never really notice it without picking up the thing and really paying attention. And sure, these were also present on the original, but they kinda blended into the design. Here though, it's much more distinct. And sure, these details are neither accurate to the GTB or the Countach or the Jalpa or your mum on a Saturday night, but they do look extremely sexy either way.
Baby, repro label's gonna fix you up good.
Oh, and I'm also just noticing them now as I'm writing this, but molded top lights. Neat. Anywho, moving around to the side, you can see the crisp blue stripe that heralds the character's iconicity. Almost wrote iconography there, but quickly realized that meant something completely different. Much like the lights at the front, the color difference really helps the detail stand out more on this release, although this time it's not due to the base plastic. Wild Rider originally had this extra thick metal stripe, which drew your attention away from the hidden detail touches. It was also kinda washed out, especially in comparison to the killer red windows. Since the blue stripe is further down and much thinner, it allows the mechanical detail to breathe a lot more. You can pay more attention to the extra air intakes, grills, and even the rearview mirrors. These are all things Wild Rider had, but that damn strike made it difficult to focus on by being so overbearing. And that's not to say the blue stripe is at all overdone. If anything, it's even more striking. Part of that's probably because the paint isn't washed out like his mold mate, but it still looks killer. I guess sometimes less is more. I will say though, bit of a shame the wheel arches aren't also painted. Not necessarily me being an accuracy buff, but rather me preferring the way the original was done. Still, given the paint required for the robot mode, I can see why they left it. Or at least I did when I originally wrote this script. Hello there, April 12th DrLockdown here, and there are now reports of a toy-accurate breakdown, dropping the day I was set to record this here audio. No idea how they're going to release this, or even if it's legitimate, but looking at the inclusion of the wheel arches makes me a very sad f***wit. Still, keep in mind, this is all small tweaks taken from the original design. When it comes to the one part of the alt mode that they were able to change, me, they went all out. They, of course, being Mark Mara and Shogo Hasui, a team made in heaven, burdened with the task of making corporate cheapness work. Still, taking off the spoiler for just a moment shows just how far they went to get this to work. Not even joking, this is the most detailed part of the alt mode. It has way more greebling than anything else, and yet somehow blends in seamlessly. The classic stepped vent design makes its return, really cementing the speedster vibe. The air intakes on the side somehow blend seamlessly with the existing mechanical detail, which, how the f*** do they get that to work? Even the back takes on a new identity, with a traditional Lamborghini outline encasing the existing knee light assembly. And then cap it off with a spoiler, and well, you've got yourself a car that, despite being 95% a vehicle he is not supposed to be, feels both fresh and purposeful. He doesn't exude the same vibe of G1 Breakdown, but freed from the context of G1, it's a damn fine alt mode. Not the best alt mode of the line, but still one well worth messing with. That said, it's definitely not without flaws. Nothing ruins this mode per se, or at least not for me, but there are things that need to at least be pointed out. For me, my biggest gripe is the fact that the spoiler is a single piece. This might not seem like much, but given the way this functions, this basically means you have semi-mandatory parts forming during transformation. Much like several other aspects of this retool, this is allegedly a point that Mark fought hard against in an attempt to rectify. Ultimately, Hasbro refused to allow him to make the spoiler two separate pieces. That said, this use of parts forming doesn't annoy me to the level previous figures have in the past. Firstly, you can just leave this off in alt mode. Personally, I think this looks kinda bland, but if you're that allergic to parts forming, it is an option. Secondly, the gun combination doesn't bother me that much. It's far from the worst parts forming piece usage I've seen. I mean, at least it doesn't try to masquerade as a shield. Atrocious, I tell you. And that brings me to 3. I often find myself forgetting about the spoiler because the other weapon storage is genuinely brilliant. The gun just plonks on the bottom using what was originally a waffle section hollowed out for budgeting. That's clever. And 4, there are split spoilers on the aftermarket, so you can always hunt one of those down if all else fails. Yes, you shouldn't have to upgrade a figure to make it acceptable, but I don't feel this is an absolute necessity, and already breakdown is beyond acceptable. Not saying I'm not going to bother, I'm definitely going down the non-F route when I have the cash. Regardless though, yes, it's an issue, but not a major one. Doubly so when compared to previous review subjects. And hey, if you do choose to upgrade him, you can actually use the spoiler on the Sunstreaker mold, so at least that part won't go to waste. Beyond that, the only other issues the fandom has brought up aren't really issues in my eyes anyway. Due to the way he transforms, the back wheels have to use mushroom pegs on the outside. Yes, it's a smidge unsightly, but I get why they had to do it this way. There's just not enough space on the inside, nor is there budget to pin these in. Ultimately, I reckon it's fine. And on top of that, clear plastic windshields. Some people are gonna hate this. I'm not one of them. That's all there is to say. So yes, all in all, pretty good alt mode. It's far from my favorite of the Legacy Stunticons, let alone the current Legacy duology, soon to be trilogy, but it's a neat little kind of jalper that gets the job done. I know being a true fan dictates I should hate this with passion, but I really don't. Even sticking to the bone white instead of the accurate cream doesn't bother me this time. Yeah, both the tune and the toy were this color. That's not yellowing over the years, that's just what breakdown is. Missing out on this rather unique color scheme that's not often seen these days should anger me, yet it doesn't. I guess it's because it's already removed from the idea of a traditional breakdown, so a further deviation isn't that much of an issue. I will say though, the leaked toy style version has no excuse. Come the f*** on, mate, come on. It's gotta be cream. Why isn't it cream? I've been waiting all these years for a cream breakdown, and the closest I have is X-Transpots. Why are you gonna do this to me, Hasbro? Why are you gonna do this to me? Besides, at the end of the day, most people are buying this for the combined mode anyway. Unless or until DNA figures out how to redo the legs with the cars on the front, which I'm still hoping they do, these things are gonna be facing backwards on a shelf. Sure, there's bot mode and vehicle mode collectors, and I get those, but it's a safe bet to assume most people display their combiners in the mode that's unique to that subclass of Transformer. So in the end, it's a solid alt mode. And even if it repulses you, it may not actually matter that much. And for me, it's surprisingly enjoyable. Maybe I was just a bit too bored with Wild Rider, so he seems like a masterpiece in comparison. But either way, I dig it. If you've been in the fandom for at least 2 years, I can guarantee you've at least seen this transformation style once. It's a very common transformation system, first making its appearance in Combiner Wars with Dead End, who I don't own, but close enough. Then it popped up again with Titan's Return Chrome Dome, and then again in Cyberverse Deluxe Bumblebee. And now of course we have it here with Breakdown, and the reason they keep using it is because it works. Yes, at this point it's kinda derivative, but it functions, it gets the job done, so there's not really an issue with using it again. That being said, this is probably the clunkiest use of it. It's a little bit difficult in certain areas, but it's still far from hateful, so I can cut it a bit of slack. Now before we start transforming anything, the first thing we want to do is remove the accessories. Yes, mandatory parts forming there, but it is what it is. Already discussed that, not going to go into greater detail. And secondly, we of course bring out the gun. Amazing weapon storage, I wish more figures did that. Hell, I wish the original mold did that, but oh well. So now the first real transformation step is bringing up the windshield like so, and it locks into place. The first time you do this, it is going to feel a little scary, like it's stressing the plastic a bit, but after a while it loosens up nicely and works well. Then they do a bit of a deviation on the old Combiner Wars style of transformation, where you move this section up, separate these two parts here, and then that will allow you to bring this all the way back. And we'll discuss this kind of backpack section just before we finish transforming it. But moving on, you come around here and open up the leg panels, and then you need to bring the arms up all the way, and this is where we start to get into that specific order of operations, where it feels a bit clunky if you don't do things right. If you don't bring the arms out, the legs have a hard time getting out. Come around to the front again and separate that off the top, and then that'll allow you to bring this whole section down, but the knees have a tendency to bend instead of the panels themselves, instead of those struts that are supposed to move, which is a bit annoying. I do kind of wish it was like Cyberverse Bumblebee, where they didn't have two separate joints joints, but just one and made use of the knee joint, because that was actually really smooth, but oh well, it is what it is. Then you close up the panels here, and you move the feet down, and you can separate the legs. Rotate the waist 180 degrees, bring out the fists like so, on these faux ratchets that get them into place, bring the arms down and bring them however you like, fold down the chest like so, and fold out the head, and fold the chest back in. And then rotate the head around, and that should be done, but there is one more optional step. Come around to the back, and you'll notice this backpack is kinda it just sort of sticks around with that bit sticking out and these weird wings that don't work very well. But if you don't like that, you can just fold these back up into the full bonnet and it works better. It's technically a bigger backpack, but it feels smaller, and it makes the profile look a lot better from the front as well. So this is the way I usually keep it, and this is the way I recommend you keep it as well. The stock photography showing that weird fucking wing thing, it's stupid. Also, even if you keep the backpack the way it is, it doesn't negatively impact the articulation, so it's kind of pointless. But yeah, regrettably, I feel this is the weakest use of the Combiner Wars dead-end style of transformation, but it still works. Aside from the knees and the oddities in the backpack, everything functions the way it should. It's not going to blow you away like some other transformations in the line, but it's fine. And sometimes that's all a deluxe needs to be, just fine with a transformation, provided the robot mode holds up to par. And does it? Well, let's take a look. In robot mode, Breakdown is a robot that's pretty much the best way of describing him. He's not a particularly flamboyant one or an extremely detailed one, nor is he a crime against humanity. He's just a little guy, forever destined to be stuck in the shadow of Sonic the Deadhog. Yet amidst a line of banger after banger, he brings the vibe of being a standard solid deluxe, and he's kind of brilliant for that. He's not some world-ending event, he's just there to do his thing. In a line where every figure is Avengers Endgame, he's over here being the first Ant-Man movie, and I kinda miss that from figures sometimes. The face sculpt is absolutely gorgeous, featuring multi-layered paint that's all applied expertly. Well, aside from the bubble on the side.
God damn it, QC Gremlin!
Again, it's a nice change of pace to see both red and yellow paint done well. So glad to be free of the previous review's bullshit. I will say though, I'm a bit disappointed they didn't carry through with the light piping, but given Hasbro's insistence on budget slashing for this poor fellow, I can see why they pivoted. No chance of getting a separate yellow piece in there. Besides, the eyes are crisp as f*** anyway. Either way, it's a wonderful face sculpt, though as a head sculpt, well, that's a different story. Yeah, for some reason he's been infected with the old fun pub beast combiner head bollocks. If this keeps up, it'll turn into full-on botconitis, at which point he'll start spewing homophobic rhetoric. Still, it's not something to get too angry over. The head proportions, not the homophobia. You can see the way Wild Rider's head was positioned obviously made it difficult to get the thing to fit into the cavity. It's a pretty small chest as is, and I don't think Maher and Hasui were expecting to have to retool this in any way. And hey, it could have been worse. They could have haphazardly mimicked the toy design, misinterpreting the combiner head as a mohawk. Boy, am I glad that never happened. Speaking of the chest, it's alright, I suppose. While I prefer the layering detail on Wild Rider, I definitely prefer the colors on Breakdown. It translates and stylizes the toon aesthetic insanely well and weirdly fits better with the existing midriff. You'd almost think Breakdown was designed first and Wild Rider was the retool, but even with half the evidence lost to time, it's clear that wasn't the case. It's probably just the unifying paint scheme, unification completely lost on the upcoming toy version. To quote the nerd, what were they thinking? That said, where the figure starts to lose me is the limbs. I wouldn't call them bad, but they're definitely the parts of the design where he descends a level in comparison to Wild Rider. The arms are just sort of there. They've got a reasonable amount of detail, but none of it really stands out. There's no paint to highlight specific parts, like the shoulder vents that double as combined mode stabilizers, or the angled paneling on the forearms. Wild Rider had the benefit of crisp red paint really making these pop, but Breakdown isn't afforded such. He's got the blue trims on the edges that carry over from the vehicle mode, but from straight ahead you can't see them at all. And all of this is because of the legs. They went way too crazy on these. For accuracy reasons, these are coated entirely in blue paint. I get the intent here, but it's honestly too much for the design. It just ends up making the shins look out of place in comparison to everything else. It's such a waste too, because the aforementioned arms get nothing as a result. And on top of all that, due to how these connects to the combined leg, chipping becomes extremely likely. While I get the push for accuracy, this seems accurate to a fault. It's surrounded by stylization that changes the nature of the design already, yet it hasn't changed itself to line up. The legs feel closer to what people imagined Breakdown would be, while the rest goes above and beyond. That said, on the whole, I still think I prefer Breakdown to Wild Rider. Often the torso and head are what the eye gravitates to anyway, so him succeeding in those categories easily puts him on top. Sure, Wild Rider may have better arms, but everything else is just kinda Breakdown at least has his own style, allowing him to stand on top. Beyond that, we don't have flaws so much as oddities. People who didn't skip the transformation, not judging you, even I find that shit boring, as well as people familiar with this mold will have noticed the backpack is mistransformed. In actuality, you're supposed to splay out two sections of the bonnet like so. Honestly, I don't know why they bothered. It accomplishes nothing in combined mode, and the robot just looks worse with them like this. On both fronts too. So yeah, I tend to leave this closed up. This means it's got a big backpack, but that's kind of the norm for combiner limbs anyway, so I hardly think it's that big of an issue. You can literally go your entire life without needing to splay out the wing portions, so I don't really consider this an issue beyond sapping up the budget from places that could have used it. It probably shouldn't have been a thing, but ah well, it is, and it doesn't particularly matter. And finally, you get the weapon. The gun is kinda, generic in every sense other than its ingenious vehicle mode storage. It's a gun. That's basically it. Doesn't even lean on the accuracy excuse because it flat out ain't. My personal frustrations with it, however, are twofold. Firstly, the paint. Once again, they've gone ham on it when it just wasn't necessary. I'd rather have had an unpainted gun and saved some of that for the arms than waste it all on this thing. Yes, the paint is lovely, but I feel it just wasn't necessary. At least make it blue if you really need to paint it, not for my sake, but for the sake of people who are desperately clinging on to every accurate element they can. Oh, and look, ironically the toy version does that. God damn it, this leak is really conflicting for me because half of it looks infinitely better while the other half ruins the good thing it had going. Probably gonna be a box set release anyway though, so I doubt I'll go in on it. Secondly, no blast effects ports. The others did really well on this front, so this feels like a missed opportunity. And yes, the tip also acts as a handle, but there have been plenty of cases where they've been able to do both. Not really an excuse in my book. Now those two are my gripes, but that's not what most people take issue with. No, that's the incorporation of Evo Fusion! AKA the dumbest excuse for a weapon gimmick I've ever seen. You may be asking, what is Evo Fusion? Well, it's basically adding a weapon to another weapon, something every other line is already capable of doing due to the addition of 5mm pegs. Now yes, I get the frustration with how lazy this system seems. Apparently this is Evo Fusion, as is this, and this. Ridiculous, right? Well, this isn't really something aimed at collectors, but rather brick and mortar stores. These guys unfortunately need gimmicks to incentivize lines to be stocked. What reason do they have to stock this line this time when they could just ask for more stock of the last one? Why shouldn't they stock yet another case of SS86RC instead? General retail is dumb as shit, and until society crumbles to dust and the nuclear winter takes over, gimmicks are always going to be a thing. In fact, it's actually clever this time how they're selling functionality to these stores when there isn't actually any at all. They're marketing it in a way that doesn't negatively impact the figures, unlike last year where we had those haphazard energon weapons that nobody particularly liked. And yes, this use of Evo Fusion is especially haphazard in comparison to the rest. The spoiler either stores on the side of the gun or turns it into an axe, neither of which look very convincing. It's not great, and it does teeter on the edge of unacceptable parts forming, but still, I just don't find myself getting angry. It's just a single tiny panel that doesn't look too bad in gun mode, and this time you can at least fix it instead of being forced to gaslight yourself into imagining it as a shield. It's definitely a flaw, but is it that bad? I can't say I think so. And that's sort of the vibe this figure presents from start to finish. As stated at the start of this section, he's not perfect, nor is he rubbish. He's just a solid figure, sticking in his lane and delivering a more than cromulent package. His articulation all works fine, aside from wrist swivels, which wouldn't be feasible given the size of the panels in there. There's not particularly much I could ask for. It's a deluxe, and it has deluxe level articulation. No reason for me to get angry. Also, kudos to fixing the universal hips. Wild Rider had this weird thing where it would flex at a certain point, making a simple A stance really difficult. No such issue with Breakdown, which is greatly appreciated. And yes, due to the backpack mess, he does end up a little shorter than most. Not quite Legends at a deluxe price point, but not a chunky guy either. Still, at no point does it feel like you're being shortchanged by your purchase. Well, maybe you are after inflation, but that's a uniform frustration. Nothing that can be done about that. Breakdown is ultimately an oxymoronic release, in the sense that he's unique because he really isn't. There are so many action figures coming out at the moment, and each seems to be a near masterclass in character updating. Sure, there are a few stumbles, but it's a real rarity all things considered. Breakdown kinda bucks that trend just by being a simple deluxe that's content to stay in its own lane. It's far from perfect, and for many that'll cement him as the worst deluxe in the trilogy, but for me, it's sort of like comfort food. Nothing amazing, but it hits me with a feeling I haven't really felt in a long time. It's just a little guy, a small little package of simple fun, and that's all he needs to be. I realize this review might seem weird in the context of the channel. Why bother reviewing the most hated Stunticon of the bunch and not delve into the others? Well, if you want reviews on the other Stunticons, Dragstrip and Dead End are fantastic, Wild Rider is kinda and Motormaster is decent, but way below expectations compared to previous Commander figures. Also, the leg gimmick doesn't really make much sense without paint on the inside panels, and the combined proportions, especially the thighs, can be a bit weird. Although I guess that's just a thing that tends to happen with official combiners these days. There. That's it. That's all I really have to say about those figures. They range from brilliant to mediocre, but there's not really enough there to discuss in a long-form video. That is, except for Breakdown. He's got this unique feeling to him that just inspires me to put my fingers to the keyboard. While the last review was a pain in the ass to write, this one was the complete opposite. It's a figure positioned between expectations and corporate reality, swamped with a wave of fandom frustration, and yet he really isn't that bad in the grand scheme of things. He's just a simple bot trying to make his way in the universe, and once in a while we need a figure like that. A palate cleanser that removes you from the overarching debate. Sometimes we just need a fun toy to mess with, and that's what Breakdown is. But as always, fandom public consciousness is a conversation, so drop your stance on Breakdown below. Did you bother picking him up, or did you skip in protest? Were you even able to find him amidst the scalping issues? Has he surprised you, or is he an insult to everything collectors stand for? And as always, remember, there's a context for everything. Till next time!
Kilometers down. Any further and we'd both be burned into a crisp. I was imprisoned here because they couldn't kill me, only contain me. And yet, you just waltz in here with your immaculate suit and your straggly silver. It begs belief you exist outside the laws of physics or something of the like. What does it matter? I know why you're here. The Vandevar is at present occupied, so if ever there were a time to strike, now would be it. Though I must admit, I am curious as to why you have such a vendetta against this nobody. I'm assuming this is personal at least. Someone of your stature wouldn't concern yourself with this crusade otherwise. You know what? To hell with it. You freed me, so the least I can do is afford you this favor. So tell me, where can I find this man? The one with the PhD